China's live fire drills around Taiwan entered day 2 with a blockade-style rehearsal. As of December 30, 2025, China's Justice Mission 2025 drills around Taiwan escalated into live fire activity and a tighter blockade-style rehearsal. Rockets were fired into waters north and south of the island, alongside coordinated naval and air operations designed to show how quickly Beijing could contain Taiwan in a crisis. This matters now because the shift from loud signaling to practical rehearsal changes the risk profile. Live fire zones, Coast Guard standoffs, and disrupted routes are not just messaging. They are the building blocks of a coercive playbook that can raise economic and political pressure without crossing the line into a declared war. This piece explains what changed on day 2, how the drills map onto a blockade scenario, and what to watch next in the days ahead. It also looks at the overlooked mechanisms that can turn exercises into a real-world squeeze on trade, travel, and confidence. The story turns on whether Beijing can turn recurring drills into a scalable blockade option without triggering a crisis it cannot control. Key points. China's drills moved deeper into live fire territory on day 2, with rockets fired into waters north and south of Taiwan and joint sea-air operations continuing around the island. The operational emphasis is containment, practicing how to restrict access to Taiwan's airspace and sea lanes while demonstrating strike options at range. Taiwan's defense authorities tracked a sharp surge in activity over a 24-hour period, including large numbers of aircraft and a combined presence of Navy and Coast Guard vessels near Taiwan's contiguous zone. The drills have a direct civilian footprint, warning zones and route disruption, affect aviation planning, regional shipping patterns, and risk pricing. The political signal is aimed in 2 directions at once, at Taipei's leadership and at external partners that supply arms or promise support in a contingency. The immediate danger is miscalculation, an accident, an overreaction, or a local tactical incident that leaders then struggle to contain. Background. Taiwan is self-governed, democratic, and militarily supported by the United States through arms, sales, and security cooperation, even as Washington maintains formal diplomatic ties with Beijing. China claims Taiwan as part of its territory and says it will not rule out the use of force to bring the island under its control. Since 2022, large-scale Chinese drills around Taiwan have become a recurring feature of the security landscape. The pattern has evolved from episodic surges to frequent, operationally meaningful activity, aircraft crossing the Taiwan Strait median line, naval groups operating closer to the island, and the use of law enforcement vessels to apply pressure below the threshold of open conflict. Justice Mission 2025 sits inside that trajectory, but day 2 matters because it adds live fire and more explicit blockade logic. A blockade, in practical terms, does not require an invasion fleet. It can begin as a set of temporary restrictions that force airlines, shippers, and insurers to change behavior, raising costs and uncertainty for Taiwan long before any decisive battle. Political and geopolitical dimensions. Beijing's incentives are layered. The first is deterrence. Discourage moves in Taipei that Beijing frames as steps toward permanent separation. The second is external messaging, signaling to Washington and regional partners that Taiwan's support carries escalating costs. Taipei's constraints are also clear. Taiwan wants to project steadiness, avoid panic, and demonstrate readiness without giving Beijing a pretext to claim provocation. That creates a narrow lane, defend airspace and waters, communicate calmly, and keep the economy functioning. Washington's dilemma is timing and credibility. Stronger support can reduce Taiwan's vulnerability, but it can also be used by Beijing as justification for sharper demonstrations. Meanwhile, regional actors, especially Japan and Southeast Asian states with major trade exposure, must manage public concern and private planning without appearing to pick an irrevocable side. Scenarios to watch are not binary. A short drill can end cleanly while still leaving a strategic residue, higher perceived risk, more frequent snap zones, and a new normal of disruption. A sharper scenario is an extended exercise that lingers long enough to force commercial actors to reroute and reprice. The worst-case scenario is a tactical incident at sea or in the air that becomes politically impossible to ignore. Economic and market impact. The fastest effects are not always stock market shocks. They are operational, route planning, freight premiums, and insurance pricing. If drills normalize the declaration of dangerous zones, airlines and shipping firms face repeated decisions with real cost. Even when flights are not formally cancelled, rerouting burns fuel, reduces capacity, and pushes delays through the system. Shipping faces a similar logic: detours, higher war risk premiums, and changes in port schedules that hit the whole regional supply chain. Taiwan's position in high-end semiconductor manufacturing adds an extra layer of sensitivity. Markets can absorb headlines. They struggle with sustained uncertainty that changes lead times and contract risk. A blockade rehearsal is designed to insert that uncertainty on demand. The most plausible near-term market outcome is not a crash, but a creeping risk premium, higher costs of doing business around the strait, more inventory buffering, and a stronger incentive for firms to diversify supply chains even if the economics are imperfect. Technological and security implications. Live fire activity and long-range strike demonstrations highlight a key shift. Beijing is rehearsing not just presence, but coordination. A blockade is a combined arms problem: air cover, naval positioning, missile, and rocket forces, and a parallel campaign of messaging and legal framing. Taiwan's defensive challenge is asymmetry. It cannot match scale, so it must focus on survivability, dispersion, and the ability to keep key systems functioning under pressure. That includes air defense, coastal missiles, and command and control resilience. For external partners, the question is not only could we intervene, but how early would we know? Drills that blur into routine activity compress warning time. That increases the value of persistent surveillance, rapid logistics, and clear thresholds for response. Two plausible next steps are worth watching. One is a more regularized use of the Coast Guard and maritime enforcement as a frontline tool. The other is the integration of rehearsals that simulate strikes on specific categories of targets, designed to pressure Taiwan's planners and shape public psychology. Social and cultural fallout. For Taiwan's public, repeated drills can create two opposite reactions at once: anxiety and habituation. Anxiety rises when live fire zones appear close to daily life. Habituation grows when crises come and go, without immediate consequence. The political impact can be subtle. Sustained pressure may harden identity and resolve, but it can also elevate. Debates about economic risk, conscription, and the costs of deterrence. That debate becomes more intense when disruption is felt not as a distant military event, but as delayed flights, constrained fishing grounds, or rising prices tied to risk premiums. In China, the public-facing narrative frames drills as justified defense of sovereignty. That can limit leadership flexibility if leaders later want to de-escalate quickly without looking weak. What most coverage misses: the key mechanism is not the rocket launch. It is the calibration. A blockade does not have to be total to be effective. If Beijing can selectively disrupt routes, declare temporary warning zones, and sustain coast guard presence near Taiwan's contiguous waters, it can force commercial actors to self-deter. Airlines and shippers do not need to be physically stopped to change behavior. They only need to believe the corridor has become unpredictable. That changes the strategic equation. The threshold is not invasion. The threshold is the moment when the region starts behaving as if an invasion might happen at any time. Once that behavior locks in, through insurance pricing, rerouting, and delayed investment, the coercive effect arrives even if no formal blockade is declared. Why this matters? In the short term, the immediate risk is an incident, a near miss, a collision, a misread signal, or a warning shot that goes wrong. Live fire and close proximity operations increase the chance of a mistake, especially when multiple forces are operating in tight spaces. In the medium term, repeated blockade rehearsals can erode Taiwan's sense of normalcy and raise the day-to-day cost of trade. That matters far beyond Taiwan. The Taiwan Strait and surrounding airspace sit on major commercial routes that connect Northeast Asia to global markets. In the long term, the strategic danger is that practice becomes policy. If Beijing can demonstrate that it can tighten and loosen pressure on demand, it gains a tool to influence Taiwan's politics and external support without absorbing the full costs of war. Concrete signs to watch next include any follow-on warning zones, the tempo of Coast Guard deployments near Taiwan's contiguous waters, and whether commercial carriers begin issuing longer-term route advisories that imply persistent risk rather than short-lived disruption. Real-world impact. A flight operations manager in Singapore recalculates schedules when warning areas appear, pushing delays downstream and raising costs for carriers already running tight margins. A logistics coordinator in Osaka fields calls from clients asking whether shipments should be rerouted, whether delivery windows can still be met, and who absorbs the higher insurance premium. A mid-sized electronics buyer in Munich is told lead times may stretch, not because production stops, but because freight and risk pricing become less predictable. A fisherman in northern Taiwan finds certain areas temporarily harder to access, with knock-on effects on daily income and local supply to markets. What's next for China's live-fire drills around Taiwan? The immediate question is whether the drills end cleanly or roll into follow-on activity that keeps pressure elevated into early 2026. A sharp end would still leave a signal Beijing can scale up quickly and operate close to Taiwan with live-fire elements. A prolonged pattern would suggest something more ambitious, training the region to accept recurring disruption as normal. The fork in the road is between deterrence theater and coercive routine. Theater fades when the cameras move on. Routine changes behavior in airlines, shipping firms, insurers, and boardrooms. The clearest indicators will be practical, not rhetorical, the frequency of declared danger zones, the persistence of Coast Guard presence near Taiwan's surrounding waters, and whether commercial actors start treating the Taiwan corridor as a standing risk rather than a temporary storm.